My son sent me a box of imported artisanal cookies. The next day, he called and asked, "Mum, have you eaten the cookies yet?" I answered, "No, I gave them all to your wife yesterday." "Why?" I heard a scream on the other end of the line. "No, no, what did you do?" And it was in that moment that I knew something terrible was about to be revealed. Something that would change my life forever. Something that would make me understand that my own son had planned my death. My name is Evelyn. I am 71 years old. I have been a widow for 8 years, and my whole life was dedicated to two things: my career as a nurse and my only son, Robert. I worked 43 years at New York General Hospital, double shifts, whole nights without sleep, all to give him the best education, the best life. When my husband died, he left me a property valued at almost $2 million, a beautiful house in the city's most exclusive area. It was my security, my legacy for Robert and my grandchildren. Or so I believed. The relationship with my daughter-in-law, Samantha, was always complicated. From the day Robert introduced her to me, I knew she saw me as a nuisance. An interfering, old-fashioned, annoying mother-in-law. Every time I tried to visit my grandchildren, Andrew and Diana, she made excuses. That they were busy, that they had activities, that maybe another day. Birthdays passed, and I barely received a photo message. Christmases were cold, perfunctory, full of fake smiles and hugs that meant nothing. Robert changed after he got married. The sweet boy who hugged me and called me his queen became a distant man, always busy, always in a rush. Visits spaced out. Calls became mechanical. "Hello, Mum, how are you?" "Fine, fine. I'll call you later. I have a meeting." And I was left holding the phone, feeling the silence devour me inside. But that Tuesday, everything seemed different. The doorbell rang around 3 in the afternoon. I opened the door and found a messenger with an elegant package, wrapped in shiny gold paper with a wine-coloured bow. The box was heavy, about the size of a shoebox, and had a label that read, "From France, with love." For Mum. My heart raced. It had been years since Robert had sent me anything like this. Nothing so elaborate, so thoughtful, so expensive. I signed the receipt and walked into the living room with trembling hands. I placed the box on the coffee table and sat across from it, just observing it. The paper crackled under my fingers when I began to unwrap it carefully, as if it were a fragile treasure. Inside was an elegant, lacquered wooden box with gold engravings on the lid. I opened it slowly. Cookies. Dozens of artisanal cookies, perfectly arranged in neat rows. Each one was a work of art, some covered in dark chocolate with gold dust, others decorated with caramelized almonds, some with raspberry jam visible in the center. The aroma that came out of that box was intoxicating, sweet, sophisticated. There was a small card inside that read, "To the best mother in the world. Enjoy them. I love you. Robert." My eyes filled with tears. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe my son still loved me. Maybe all this distance was just a phase, work stress, the responsibilities of being a father. I held the card against my chest and smiled like a fool. An old fool, full of hope. I closed the box without tasting a single cookie. They were too beautiful, too special. I wanted to savor them calmly, perhaps with tea, perhaps while looking at old photos of Robert when he was a boy. I wanted that moment to last. The next day, Wednesday, Samantha showed up at my door unannounced. That was already strange. Samantha never visited me. Never. But there she was, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, wearing a beige dress and high heels, as if she had just come from some important meeting. Evelyn, she said, and her voice sounded strangely kind, almost forced. Can I come in? I need to talk to you. I let her in, confused, cautious. We sat in the living room and she looked around with that expression she always had, as if evaluating, judging. Look, she began, crossing her legs. I know things between us haven't been easy, and I want to change that. The children miss you. I want us to be closer too. I didn't believe a word of it. But something in me, that pathetic part that still wanted to be loved, that still wanted to belong to that family, decided to give her a chance. I'm glad to hear that, I replied, although my voice sounded doubtful even to me. She smiled, and it was then that she saw the box of cookies on the table. Her eyes lit up. Oh, what is that? It looks delicious. Robert sent them to me yesterday, I said proudly, still feeling that foolish warmth in my chest. They are from France. Artisanal. Samantha leaned closer to see, and something crossed her face. Surprise? Fear? I'm not sure, but it disappeared so fast that I thought I had imagined it. What a beautiful gesture from him, she murmured. He always thinks of you. And then, on a stupid impulse, in a desperate gesture to build a bridge, to win her over, to finally be accepted, I said the words that almost cost me my life. You know what? Take them. Take them all. For you and the children. I want you to enjoy them together. Samantha blinked. What? No, Evelyn, they are yours. Robert sent them to you. I insist, I said, pushing the box toward her. Please, it would be my honor. Besides, I shouldn't be eating so many sweets at my age. You will enjoy them more. She hesitated, looking at the box as if it were something dangerous. But finally she smiled, that fake smile again, and took the box in her hands. You are very generous, Evelyn. Thank you. The children will be delighted. She left 20 minutes later, taking the cookies, taking my small gift from Robert, unwittingly taking my death sentence. That night, dining alone as always, my phone started ringing. It was Robert. I got excited. Maybe he was calling to ask me if I liked the cookies, to hear my thanks, to have one of those long conversations we no longer had. I answered with joy. Son, what a beautiful gift. The cookies are… Mum, he interrupted me, and his voice sounded strange, tense, almost hysterical. The cookies, did you eat them yet? I was silent for a moment, confused by his tone. What? No, did you eat them or not? His voice went up an octave, desperate. No, Robert. I gave them to Samantha yesterday when she came to visit me. I wanted to do something nice for her and the children. No. What did you do? The scream was so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. I felt my stomach clench as fear began to crawl up my back like a poisonous spider. Robert, what's wrong? What is happening? Silence. A terrifying silence. And then his broken voice. Oh my God. Oh my God. How many did she eat? Did she eat? Did the children eat? I don't know. The line went dead. My hands were shaking so much that the phone fell to the floor. I picked it up clumsily and dialed Robert's number once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. Voicemail. I called Samantha. Voicemail too. Panic began to squeeze my chest like an iron claw. What was in those cookies? Why did Robert sound so desperate, so terrified? I put on my coat with trembling fingers and grabbed my car keys. I drove toward Robert's house like a maniac, running 2 red lights, feeling my heart beat so hard I thought it would explode. The drive that usually took 20 minutes I made in 11. When I arrived, there was an ambulance parked in front of the house, the red and white lights illuminating the whole street like a flashing nightmare. I got out of the car without even locking it. I ran toward the door. Paramedics were carrying out a stretcher. Samantha was there, pale as a corpse, with an oxygen mask covering her face, convulsing violently. Her eyes were rolled back. Foam was coming out of the corners of her lips. Andrew and Diana were crying at the entrance, hugging each other, their faces full of terror. "Samantha!" I screamed, trying to get closer, but a paramedic stopped me. "Ma'am, stay back. Please." Robert appeared behind the children, and when our eyes met, I saw something I will never forget. It wasn't worry. It wasn't love. It was pure panic. Panic at having been discovered. I saw it in his dilated pupils, in the way his mouth trembled, in how he immediately avoided my gaze. "Robert, what happened?" My voice was barely a choked whisper. "The cookies," he said in a hollow, mechanical voice. "She ate the cookies and she started feeling sick. Vomiting. Convulsions. She couldn't breathe." The paramedics loaded Samantha into the ambulance. One of them approached Robert. "Sir, we need to know exactly what your wife ate. Every detail matters. This looks like severe intoxication, possibly poisoning." The word fell like a bomb. Poisoning. Robert stammered. "Cookies. Just cookies. Artisanal. From France. Where are they? We need to take them to the hospital for analysis." Robert ran into the house and came back with the wooden box, now half empty. The paramedics took it with gloves, put it in an evidence bag, and left with Samantha toward the hospital, the sirens piercing the night. I stood there, in the middle of the street, surrounded by the crying of my grandchildren, looking at my son, and something inside me broke. "Robert," I said slowly, "what was in those cookies?" "I don't know, Mum." His voice sounded fake, rehearsed. "Liar." I took a step toward him. "Your reaction on the phone. Your desperation. Did you know something was wrong with those cookies? What was it?" "I don't know," he screamed, and the children flinched. "Maybe they went bad. Maybe there was a manufacturing error. I didn't. Why did you send them to me then?" My voice broke. "Why me?" We stared at each other. In that moment, under the artificial light of the street lamps, I saw a stranger. I didn't recognize the man in front of me. I didn't recognize his cold eyes, his tense jaw, the way his hands clenched into fists. "I have to go to the hospital," he finally said, avoiding my question. He took the children by the hands. "Stay here if you want, or go home, whatever you prefer." He left me there, alone, in the darkness. I drove back to my house in a state of shock, tears blurring my vision. I walked in, closed the door, and collapsed on the sofa. My mind was a whirlwind of unanswered questions, of horrible suspicions that I didn't want to accept. Had my son sent me poisoned cookies? Had my own son tried to kill me? No, it was impossible. Ridiculous. Robert loved me. He had to love me. I was his mother. But then, why his reaction? Why that panic? I spent the whole night awake, sitting in the darkness, waiting for news. At 5 in the morning, my phone finally rang. It was Robert. "Mum." His voice sounded exhausted, defeated. "Samantha is in intensive care. Arsenic poisoning. The doctors say if she had eaten one more cookie, she would be dead." The world stopped. Arsenic, one of the most lethal substances that exists. I knew it well, after 43 years as a nurse. Arsenic causes multi-organ failure. internal hemorrhaging, a slow and agonizing death. Arsenic, I repeated, my voice barely audible. How? How did arsenic get into those cookies? Silence on the other end. Robert, I said, and now my voice was firm, cold. Who sold you those cookies? I bought them online, from a seller in France. I don't know how. Tell me the truth. Each word came out like a knife. Tell me the truth right now, or I'm calling the police. The police are already coming. He exploded. There is already an investigation open. Intentional poisoning. They are going to interrogate me. They are going to interrogate you too. So don't threaten me, Mum, because we are both in this. Both of us. I stood up from the sofa, shaking with fury. I didn't poison anything. I just gave away a gift that you sent me. A gift that was apparently designed to kill me. The silence that followed was deafening. Mum, you tried to kill me. The words came out like a sob. You tried to murder your own mother. You're crazy. You're delusional. Why, Robert? Why would you want to see me dead? Don't say stupid thing. I would never. Then explain, I screamed. Explain why you sent poisoned cookies. Explain your hysterical reaction when I told you I had given them to Samantha. Explain why you knew exactly what was in those cookies. He hung up. He simply hung up the phone. I was left standing there, in the middle of my living room, holding the dead phone against my ear. And it was then that everything began to click. The spaced-out visits, the distancing, the questions Robert had been asking me lately about my will, about the property, about my finances. I just want to make sure you're okay, Mum, that everything is in order. The house, the darn house, the property valued at almost $2 million that my husband had left me. Robert was my sole heir. If I died, everything would be his. My own son had planned my murder for money. I fell to my knees in the middle of the living room and vomited. I vomited until there was nothing left in my stomach, until there were only dry retches and bitter tears. The pain in my chest wasn't physical. It was something much worse. It was the death of everything I thought I knew about love, about family, about the person I brought into the world and raised with my own hands. 3 days later, 2 detectives knocked on my door. Detective James Smith and his partner, Detective Brenda Torres. They showed me their badges and asked permission to enter. I offered them coffee with trembling hands, and we sat in the living room where everything had begun. Mrs. Evelyn, began Detective James, a man in his 50s with tired but kind eyes. We need to ask you some questions about the cookies you received from your son Robert. I told them everything, every detail. The arrival of the package, Samantha's visit, my stupid generosity, Robert's call, his reaction, everything. Detective Brenda took meticulous notes as I spoke. Did you taste any cookie? James asked. No, not one. That saved your life, Brenda said, looking up from her notebook. The lab confirmed that each cookie contained enough arsenic to kill an adult. If you had eaten 2 or 3, as was the intention, you would have died in a matter of hours. Tears ran down my cheeks. My son really tried to kill me. The detectives exchanged glances. Mrs. Evelyn, Detective James said, leaning forward. We have been investigating your son for the last 3 days, and what we have discovered is disturbing. He opened a manila folder and pulled out several documents. Robert has gambling debts of more than $300,000. He owes money to illegal loan sharks, dangerous people. He is 3 months behind on his house mortgage. His consulting business is bankrupt. He is financially desperate. Brenda continued. Furthermore, we found very specific searches on his computer. how to get arsenic without a trace, symptoms of arsenic poisoning in the elderly, how to make a death look natural, artisanal cookie suppliers in Europe. All of this dates back 3 months. I felt the floor open up beneath my feet. 3 months, I whispered. He has been planning to kill me for 3 months. It appears so, James confirmed. We also found messages on his phone with a contact saved as supplier. The conversations are coded, but they mention the special package for the old lady and make sure the dose is lethal but looks like a heart attack. Period. Oh my God. I brought my hands to my mouth. There's more, Brenda said, and her voice became softer, as if preparing me for another blow. We found falsified documents in his office, documents showing supposed authorizations signed by you to transfer the ownership of this house to his name. The signature is fake, but it is very well done. He planned to sell this property immediately after your death to pay off his debts. The room began to spin. I grabbed the arm of the sofa so I wouldn't fall. When are you going to arrest him? We already did, James replied. This morning, at 6. He is in custody right now. But we need your complete cooperation to build the case. Your testimony is crucial. I will do whatever is necessary, I said firmly, although inside I was shattered into 1,000 pieces. Whatever. The detectives left an hour later, leaving me with copies of some documents and a card with their direct numbers. I stayed sitting on the sofa, looking at those papers, seeing the cold, brutal evidence that my son had wanted to murder me. Not out of rage, not out of madness, not out of a fit of violence, but for money. Cold, calculated, premeditated murder for $2 million. That night I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just sat in the darkness, replaying every moment of the last few years in my mind. Every time Robert asked about my finances. Every time he suggested that I should get my affairs in order. Every time he mentioned how expensive life was, how difficult it was to support a family. All those conversations now had a sinister, poisonous meaning. The next day, Samantha woke up in the hospital. The doctors said it was a miracle. She had eaten only 2 cookies before the bitter taste made her stop. 2 cookies, enough to almost kill her, but not enough to succeed. I spent the whole day at the hospital, sitting in the waiting room, not daring to go in. What would I say to her? How would I look into the eyes of the woman who almost died because of me? But it was she who sought me out. A nurse came out and told me that Samantha wanted to see me. I walked toward her room with trembling legs. She was lying in bed, pale, haggard, connected to multiple machines. Her eyes, however, burned with an intensity that scared me. "Evelyn," she said in a hoarse voice, "sit down." I sat in the chair next to her bed, my hands clasped in my lap, not daring to look directly at her. "The detectives told me everything," she continued. "The cookies were for you. Robert wanted to kill you. And I almost died in your place." "I'm sorry," I whispered, and tears began to fall. "I am so sorry, Samantha. If I had known, if I had suspected anything, it's not your fault." Her voice was hard, cutting. "The fault is with that monster I married. That man who slept next to me every night while planning to murder his own mother. That man who kissed me on the forehead while I was almost dying from his poison." She was quiet for a moment, and I saw her hands clench into fists on the white sheets. "The detectives also told me about his debts, about his lies. You know what else they found out?" She looked directly at me now. "He has a mistress, a woman named Carol, 26 years old. He rented her an apartment with the money he was supposedly using for Andrew and Diana's private schooling. He has been lying about everything. I felt nauseous again. Samantha, I didn't know anything about this. I know. She exhaled slowly. That's why I want to talk to you. The detectives told me they need to build a solid case, that they need evidence, testimonies, irrefutable proof to ensure Robert spends decades in prison. And I am going to help them. I am going to destroy him. There was something terrifying in her voice, something cold and determined that made me understand that Samantha was not the superficial, frivolous woman I had thought. There was steel beneath that surface. Me too, I said, surprising myself with the firmness of my voice. I also want him to pay for what he did. We looked at each other, and in that moment something strange was born between us. An alliance, a sisterhood forged in betrayal and pain. Samantha left the hospital a week later. The doctors said she had suffered permanent kidney damage, that she would have to take medication for the rest of her life, that she would never be completely the same. But she was alive, and she was furious. We met at my house with Detective James and a lawyer Samantha had hired, a man named George, 60 years old, with a reputation for being ruthless in court. He spread several documents on the dining room table. Ladies, George began in a grave voice, what you are about to face will not be easy. Robert has already hired one of the best defense attorneys in the city. He will try to paint himself as a victim, as someone who was deceived by a fraudulent supplier. He will say he had no idea the cookies were poisoned. He will invent any lie to save himself. How strong is the case? Samantha asked, her voice already firmer than a week ago. Very strong, Detective James replied. We have the internet searches, the messages with the supplier, the falsified documents, the forensic analysis of the cookies showing intentional poisoning with lethal doses, and the clear motive, massive debts, and a multi-million-dollar inheritance. But we need more. What else do you need? I asked. George looked at me intently. We need both of you to testify. We need you to tell your story in front of a jury. We need the world to see the monster Robert truly is. I'll do it, I said immediately. Me too, Samantha added. Good, George nodded. Because this is going to be public. The media is already following the case. Millionaire son tries to poison elderly mother. It's a juicy headline. They are going to dig into your lives. They are going to look for any dirt, any secret, anything they can use. Are you prepared for that? I looked at Samantha. She looked at me, and we both nodded. We are prepared, we said in unison. For the next 2 weeks, my life became a whirlwind of police interviews, sworn statements, and meetings with lawyers. George meticulously prepared us for the interrogation. He made us repeat our story 100 times, looking for inconsistencies, making sure every detail was perfect. And meanwhile, the story exploded in the media. Son sends poisoned cookies to his mother to inherit millions. 71-year-old mother saves her life by giving lethal gift to daughter-in-law. Arsenic in gourmet cookies. The perfect plan that went wrong. My phone didn't stop ringing. Reporters camped out in front of my house. Cameras followed me to the grocery store. Every time I went out, the flashes blinded me. Mrs. Evelyn, how do you feel knowing your son tried to kill you? Will you forgive Robert? What would you say to him now if you could? I took refuge in my house, with the curtains closed, watching my private life become public entertainment. But the worst part wasn't the reporters. The worst part was when they finally allowed me to see Robert. It was in jail, in a cold, grey visiting room separated by thick glass, speaking through dirty phones that smelled of desperation. When I walked in and saw him on the other side, dressed in the orange inmate uniform, unshaven, with deep dark circles, I felt my heart break in two again. For a moment, just a moment, I saw my son. The boy who used to hug me and tell me I was his hero. The teenager who cried in my arms when his first love rejected him. The young man who asked for my blessing before getting married. But then he spoke, and the illusion was broken. "Mum," he said, and his voice sounded soft, manipulative. "This is a terrible misunderstanding. I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe me. Those cookies, I bought them from a legitimate seller. I had no idea they were contaminated. Someone is trying to frame me." I remained silent, just looking at him, waiting. "I need you to help me," he continued, leaning toward the glass. "I need you to tell the police this is a mistake, to withdraw your testimony. I'm your son, Mom, your only son. You can't let me rot in jail for something I didn't do." "Something you didn't do," I repeated slowly, and my voice was so cold that even I was surprised. "Robert, the police found your internet searches. They found your messages with the supplier. They found the falsified documents with my signature. They found everything." His face changed. The kind mask cracked for a second, and I saw rage underneath. Pure rage. "They are fabricating evidence. They are setting me up." "Why?" I asked. "Why would they set you up? What would they gain?" He had no answer for that. "Tell me the truth," I continued, and now my voice trembled. "Look me in the eyes and tell me the truth, Robert. You tried to kill me." We stared at each other through the dirty glass. I saw his jaw clench, his fists tighten, something dark and terrible cross his eyes. "You are ruining my life," he finally said, avoiding my question. "You and that witch Samantha. You are destroying me for nothing." "For nothing," I repeated, feeling the fury begin to replace the pain. "You almost killed your wife. You planned my murder for months. You falsified my signature. You were going to steal my house. And you say it's for nothing." "It was my right," he exploded, and there it was. The truth. Finally. "That house should be mine. That money should be mine. Dad promised it to me before he died. He told me everything would be mine. But you're still there, clinging to everything, living in that huge mansion like a queen while I drown in debt." Tears ran down my cheeks, but not from sadness, from rage. "Your father never promised you anything. He provided for you. He paid for your education. He helped you get established. But the house was mine, my inheritance, my security." "You are 71 years old," he screamed. "What do you need $2 million for? What do you need that giant house for? You're going to die soon anyway. I just sped up the inevitable." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the guard standing nearby looked at us with wide eyes. "So it's true," I whispered. "You really tried to kill me." Robert realized what he had just admitted. He tried to backtrack. "No, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." I stood up, holding the phone with trembling hands. "You just confessed. And I hope that every day you spend in prison, you remember this moment. Remember that your own greed, your own wickedness, your own stupidity put you there." "Mom, wait." I slammed the phone down and walked toward the exit without looking back. His muffled screams through the glass followed me, but I didn't stop. Outside in the jail parking lot, I collapsed against my car and cried. I cried for the son I lost, for the man he became, for the family we would never be again. But when I finished crying, something inside me changed. The pain transformed into determination. The sadness turned into strength. If Robert wanted to see me as an obstacle, as something disposable, then I would show him exactly what this old woman could do. I called George that same night. I want his confession on record, I told him. I want it used in court. Were there cameras in the visiting room? He asked. Yes, and microphones. I checked with the guard when I asked. Perfect. I will request the recordings tomorrow morning. This seals the case, Evelyn. With his direct confession, there is no way he can escape. But I wanted more than just a sealed case. I wanted complete justice. I wanted Robert to lose everything he ever valued. I hired a private investigator recommended by George, a serious man named Michael, different from the detective, specializing in financial fraud and adultery cases. I gave him $50,000 and told him, find everything, every lie, every secret, every betrayal. I don't care how long it takes. It took him 2 weeks. The results came in a thick folder that he dropped onto my table with a dull thud. Mrs. Evelyn, he said, your son is worse than we imagined. I opened the folder and began to read. With each page, I felt my stomach twist more. Robert didn't have one mistress. He had 3. Carol, 26 years old, the one Samantha already knew. But there was also Diana. Yes, the same name as his daughter, 32 years old, whom he had promised marriage. And Martha, 29, who was 5 months pregnant and believed Robert was going to leave his wife for her. He had promised all 3 a future together. He had told all 3 that I was terminally ill and that he would soon inherit millions. He had shown them photos of my house, telling them they would live there together. He had spent more than $200,000 on these women. Apartments, jewelry, vacations, cars. All with money he didn't have. Money borrowed from illegal loan sharks who were now looking for him to collect. But that wasn't all. The investigator also discovered that Robert had been stealing from Andrew and Diana's college savings account. $60,000 that their paternal grandparents had left specifically for their education. All spent on online sports betting, casinos, his mistresses. He had falsified Samantha's signature on loan documents, putting the family home up as collateral without her knowing. They were weeks away from losing the house. And worst of all, he had taken out a life insurance policy on me without my knowledge, using falsified documents. A policy for $500,000. If I had died, he would have received my house valued at $2 million plus $500,000 from the insurance. $2.5 million. That was the price of my life to my son. I closed the folder with trembling hands. Is this admissible in court? I asked. Every page, the investigator confirmed. Everything is documented with receipts, bank statements, contracts, text messages, recordings. It's airtight. Good. I stood up, feeling the rage fill me with energy. Then we are going to use everything. I called Samantha immediately. She came to my house that same afternoon, still weak but walking better. I showed her everything. I watched her face go from confusion to shock, from shock to fury, from fury to something cold and calculated. That son of a bitch, she murmured, reading about his multiple lovers. That damned son of a bitch. There's more, I said, pointing to the section on the children's account. When she finished reading, Samantha closed the folder slowly and looked at me with eyes that burned with determination. I am going to destroy him, she said in a quiet but lethal voice. I don't just want him to go to prison. I want him to lose everything. His reputation, his freedom, his children, his future. Everything. Me too, I replied. We held hands across the table, 2 women who had been enemies, now united by a common purpose: absolute revenge. Over the next few weeks, Samantha and I became a perfectly coordinated war machine. George guided us step by step, building not only a criminal case, but a complete and systematic destruction of everything Robert had built on lies. First, we went after his mistresses. The investigator located the three women and showed them the evidence that they had all been deceived simultaneously. Carol broke down in tears when she saw the photos of Robert with the other two. Diana, the one with the same name as my granddaughter, went into shock upon discovering that the money he had given came from his own children's college account. And Martha, the pregnant one, had a breakdown when she learned that everything had been an elaborate lie. George convinced them to testify. He explained that they were victims too, that Robert had used and manipulated them. He promised them legal protection, and one by one they accepted. Then came the financial part. Samantha, as the legally married wife, had the right to review all joint accounts. With the help of a forensic accountant, we uncovered every suspicious transaction, every unauthorized withdrawal, every fraudulent loan. It was a labyrinth of financial crimes that dated back almost 4 years. He has been planning this for a long time, the accountant, a bald man named Arthur, said, pointing to a timeline on his computer. Look here. 3.5 years ago, he started diverting money from the family accounts. Small amounts at first, nothing to raise suspicion. Then he gradually increased it. How much in total? Samantha asked, her voice trembling. Arthur typed some numbers. Between the children's accounts, the fraudulent loans, and the money diverted from the joint accounts, approximately $420,000. The silence in the office was thick. Samantha brought her hands to her mouth. I felt the room spin. That money, Arthur continued, was spent mainly in 3 areas: his mistresses, online gambling, and interest payments to illegal loan sharks. Nothing is left. It all evaporated. My children, Samantha whispered. My children's future. He destroyed everything for his vices. But George smiled, and it was a frightening smile. This is excellent for our case. Every transaction is an additional charge. Fraud, embezzlement, theft, forgery. We are talking decades in prison, not years. We also filed a civil lawsuit against Robert for the damages to Samantha's health. George calculated the present and future medical costs, the psychological trauma, the loss of quality of life. The figure reached $1.5 million. Obviously, he doesn't have that money, George explained. But when he gets out of prison, if he ever gets out, any income he has will be garnished for the rest of his life. He will never have anything. He will never be financially free. The satisfaction I felt hearing that should have embarrassed me. But it didn't. After what Robert had tried to do to me, after what he did to Samantha, to his own children, to those innocent women, he deserved every bit of suffering that awaited him. Meanwhile, the story continued to grow in the media. It was no longer just local news. National channels had picked it up. True crime shows contacted us to make documentaries. Psychologists appeared on television as analyzing Robert's mind, diagnosing him with narcissism, sociopathy, a total lack of empathy. And then, Robert made his biggest mistake. From jail, he managed to have someone post on his behalf on social media. A long, detailed post where he painted himself as the victim. He said that I was a manipulative, controlling mother who had never really loved him. That Samantha was a frigid, useless wife who had pushed him to seek comfort in other women. That all of this was a conspiracy to steal his legitimate inheritance. The post went viral, but not in the way he expected. People tore him apart in the comments. Hundreds, thousands of people calling him a monster, a coward, human garbage. Women's groups organized protests outside the jail, demanding the maximum sentence. The hashtags, Justice for Evelyn and hashtag Rot in Prison, trended for days. A news channel asked me for a live interview. George advised me to accept. It's your chance to control the narrative, he said. Show the world who you really are. The interview was in an elegant studio, in front of millions of viewers. The host, a woman named Sharon, different from the mistress, treated me with respect and compassion. She asked me about my life as a nurse, about raising Robert as a single mother after my husband died, about the moment I discovered the truth. I spoke with brutal honesty. No fake tears, no unnecessary drama, just the truth. I told the world how it feels to know that the person you carried in your womb, who you fed, loved unconditionally, planned your murder for money. Would you ever forgive him? Sharon asked at the end. I thought about it for a long moment. Forgiveness, I said slowly, is not something that is owed by default. It is earned with genuine repentance, with real change, with reparation for the harm caused. Robert has shown none of that. He has only shown rage at being caught. So no, I will not forgive him. Not now. Maybe never. The clip of that response was played millions of times. I became, unintentionally, a symbol, a representation of all the elderly people who suffer abuse from their own family members. A voice for the silenced. Offers began to pour in. Publishers wanted me to write a book. Hollywood producers wanted to make a movie. Organizations for the protection of older adults asked me to be their spokesperson. But the most important thing came when the district attorney called me personally. Mrs. Evelyn, he said, we have enough evidence to guarantee a conviction, but I want to go further. I want this case to send a message. Would you be willing to testify in a public trial? Absolutely, I replied without hesitation. It will be brutal, he warned. The defense will try to tear you apart on the stand. They will question your character, your mental health, your motivations. They will insinuate that you somehow provoked this. Let them try, I said firmly. I have nothing to hide. Samantha also agreed to testify, and the 3 mistresses, and the forensic accountant, and the detectives, and the doctors who treated Samantha. George built a witness list so long and devastating that Robert's lawyer tried to negotiate a deal. They wanted Robert to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence, 15 years instead of life in prison. The prosecutor called me to consult. It's your decision, he said. A trial is risky. There is always the possibility, however small, that a jury could be manipulated. A deal guarantees he goes to prison. What is your recommendation? I asked. Personally, with the evidence we have, I would go to trial. I think we can get 30 years, maybe more. I looked at Samantha, who was sitting next to me. She nodded. We are going to trial, I said. The date was set for 6 weeks later. And during those 6 weeks, something extraordinary happened to me. I transformed. Not physically at first, but internally. I went from being a broken, betrayed, destroyed woman to someone with purpose, someone with fire. I started waking up early every morning and walking 3 miles. I lost weight. I regained strength. I hired a stylist. I cut my hair, which I had worn long my whole life, into an elegant, modern bob. I bought new clothes, no longer the floral dresses of an old woman, but elegant suits in pearl grey and emerald green, high heels that made me feel powerful. I joined a support group for victims of family abuse. I listened to stories similar to mine. I shared my pain, and I found healing in the community. Samantha officially divorced Robert. The papers were signed 3 weeks before the trial. She regained full custody of Andrew and Diana. Robert didn't even fight it. His lawyer advised him not to, that any custody battle would only worsen his public image. The children were devastated. Andrew, at 12 years old, understood perfectly what his father had done. He became quiet, withdrawn. Diana, younger, only asked when Dad would come home. Samantha and I took them to therapy. We gave them all the love and support we could. One afternoon, Andrew came to visit me alone. He sat on my sofa, his hands clasped, and finally spoke. "Grandma," he said in a shaky voice, "Dad really tried to kill you." I didn't lie to him. "Yes, my love, he did." "Why?" "For money, for greed, for reasons that even he probably doesn't fully understand." Andrew began to cry, and I hugged him tightly against my chest. "It's not your fault," I whispered. "None of this is your fault, or your sister's. Your father made terrible decisions, but that does not define who you are." "Everyone at school talks about it," he sobbed. "They call me the killer's son. They say I'll be a criminal too when I grow up." I felt my heart break again, but this time for my innocent grandson. "Listen to me carefully, Andrew," I said, lifting his face so he would look at me. "You are not your father. You have the chance to be different, better, stronger, and I will be here to help you, always." He hugged me tighter, and we stayed like that for a long time. When he finally left that afternoon, I knew that no matter what happened in the trial, my true mission was to protect these children from their father's poisoned legacy. The days before the trial were a whirlwind. George prepared us intensely. He made us practice our testimony over and over. "The defense will try to confuse you," he warned us. "They will ask tricky questions. They will try to make you angry, make you cry, make you seem irrational. Stay calm. Answer only what is asked. Don't let them provoke you." Samantha and I practiced together every night. We would sit in my living room and ask each other tough questions. "It's not true that you were always controlling of your son. It's not true that you pushed Robert to seek other women because of your frigidity." Horrible, insulting questions designed to make us lose our composure. But we didn't. We became like stone. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. The courthouse was packed. Reporters filled every available seat. Television cameras waited outside. Security had to control the crowds who wanted to get in. I walked into the courtroom dressed in a silver-grey suit, my hair perfectly styled, makeup subtle but impeccable. I was no longer the fragile, broken old woman of months ago. I was a woman in invisible armor, ready for battle. Samantha walked in behind me, equally transformed. She wore an ivory suit, looking elegant and strong despite the invisible scars the poison had left on her body. And then I saw Robert. He was sitting at the defense table, dressed in a charcoal suit that his lawyer had probably loaned him, trying to look respectable. But he couldn't hide the weight he had lost, the deep, dark circles, the way his hands trembled slightly. When our eyes met, he tried to smile, a sad, pleading smile, as if saying, "Mum, help me." I simply looked at him coldly and took my seat behind the prosecutor. The judge entered, an older man named Michael, coincidentally the same name as my investigator, with a reputation for being fair but severe. The trial began with opening arguments. The prosecutor, a young, hungry man named David, presented the case with surgical precision. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "this is a case about the deepest betrayal that can exist. A son who meticulously planned, for months, the murder of his own mother. Not for self-defense, not out of madness, not out of passion, but for $2.5 million. David presented every piece of evidence, the internet searches, the messages with the supplier, the falsified documents, the analysis of the cookies showing lethal levels of arsenic, the recorded confession from the jail. Each image projected on the big screen was one more nail in Robert's coffin. Then came the defense attorney, an older, calculating man named Arthur, who tried to paint Robert as a victim of circumstances. My client, he said in a smooth voice, is a man who made mistakes, yes. But premeditated murder is an extremely serious accusation that requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The internet searches can be explained as morbid curiosity. The messages are ambiguous and taken out of context. And the alleged confession was obtained under extreme stress, with his mother emotionally manipulating him. My blood boiled listening to him, but I kept my face neutral, exactly as George had taught me. The first few days of the trial consisted of technical testimonies: the detective who investigated the case, the toxicologist who analyzed the cookies, the forensic specialist who explained to the jury exactly how arsenic kills, slowly and painfully, causing multiple organ failure. If Mrs. Evelyn had consumed 2 cookies, the toxicologist, a serious man with thick glasses, explained, she would have started feeling symptoms in 2 to 6 hours. Severe nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain. In 24 hours, she would be in kidney failure. In 48 hours, she probably would have died. And due to her age and pre-existing conditions, common in people over 70, the death would have been easily attributed to natural causes without an exhaustive autopsy. The jury listened attentively, some taking notes, others just looking at Robert with evident disgust. Then came my turn to testify. I was called to the stand on the afternoon of the 3rd day. I walked with my back straight, my head held high. I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Prosecutor David gently guided me through my testimony. I told him my story from the beginning. My life as a nurse, raising Robert alone after my husband's death. The increasingly distant relationship with my son. The arrival of the package. My decision to give away the cookies. The desperate call. The visit to the jail where Robert confessed. Mrs. Evelyn, David asked, can you repeat exactly what your son said during that visit? I took a deep breath. He said, "You are 71 years old. What do you need $2 million for? You're going to die soon anyway." I just sped up the inevitable. A murmur ran through the room. Several jury members exchanged shocked glances. "How did hearing those words make you feel?" David asked. "Like I had been stabbed," I replied, and my voice broke slightly for the first time. Because I realized that my son, the person I loved the most in this world, saw me as an obstacle, as something disposable. My life had no value to him beyond the money he could inherit. "Thank you, Mrs. Evelyn," David said softly. "Your witness." Defense attorney Arthur slowly rose, like a predator stalking his prey. He approached the stand with a false smile. "Mrs. Evelyn," he began, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "it must be very difficult for you to be here testifying against your own son." "It is the most difficult thing I have ever done in my life," I answered honestly. "And yet here you are. Isn't it true that you and Robert have had a strained relationship for years?" "We grew distant after his marriage, yes." "Isn't it true that you never approved of his marriage to Samantha?" "I had reservations at first, but I overcame them." "Isn't it true that you frequently criticized his life decisions, his career, his way of raising his children?" George stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. Speculative and unfounded." "Sustained," the judge said. Arthur changed tactics. "Mrs. Evelyn, isn't it true that you refused to help your son financially when he was going through economic difficulties?" "He never asked me for help," I replied firmly. "Are you sure about that? Isn't it possible that he mentioned his problems and you simply refused to listen?" "Objection," David said. "Argumentative." "Sustained." Arthur continued for over an hour, trying to paint me as a cold, insensitive mother who had pushed her son to desperation. But I remained calm. answering every question with precision, refusing to be provoked. Finally, after trying every possible angle, Arthur gave up. No further questions. I stepped down from the stand and returned to my seat. George squeezed my hand discreetly. "You did perfect," he whispered. The next day, it was Samantha's turn. She took the stand impeccably dressed, and her testimony was devastating. She described in detail how she had eaten the cookies, how the taste was strangely bitter, but she attributed it to some exotic ingredient. How minutes later she began to feel dizzy, how the abdominal pain was so intense that she thought she was going to die. "I was on the bathroom floor," she said, her voice trembling with contained emotion, "vomiting blood, convulsing, unable to breathe. And the last thing I thought before fainting was, my children are going to find my body. My babies are going to see their mother dead on the floor." Several jury members wiped their eyes. A woman in the front row was openly weeping. When it was the defense attorney's turn, he tried to insinuate that Samantha was exaggerating her symptoms out of revenge against an unfaithful husband. But Samantha was prepared. She pulled a pill bottle from her purse. "These," she said firmly, holding them up for everyone to see, "are the medications I have to take 3 times a day for the rest of my life because of the permanent kidney damage caused by the arsenic. Do you want me to also show you the medical reports detailing my chronic renal insufficiency, or the hospital bills for $180,000? The defense attorney backed away. No further questions. Then came the mistresses. One by one, Carol, Diana, and Martha took the stand and told almost identical stories of manipulation and deceit. Robert had promised them all a golden future financed by my impending death. Carol cried as she explained how Robert had shown her photos of my house, telling her it would soon be theirs. "He told me his mother was terminally ill with cancer," she sobbed, "that it was only a matter of months, that after she passed away, he would inherit everything and we would get married." Martha, the pregnant woman, was the most shocking. Her belly was now prominent at 7 months. "He wanted me to have an abortion," she said in a broken voice, "because the baby would ruin his plans. He said that after he sorted out his mother's business, we would have all the children we wanted. But he needed that money first." The jury looked at Robert with absolute contempt. He kept his head down, unable to look any of these women in the eyes. But the most devastating evidence came from the forensic accountant, Arthur. He presented a detailed analysis of every financial transaction Robert had made over the last 4 years. On giant screens, he showed exactly how he had stolen from his children's college account, how he had falsified loans, how he had spent every dollar on vices and mistresses. "In total," Arthur concluded, adjusting his glasses, "Mr. Robert defrauded approximately $420,000 from his own family. Additionally, he took out a fraudulent insurance policy on his mother's property for $500,000. His plan was to obtain $2.5 million in total, $2 million from his mother's property and $500,000 from the insurance." The prosecutor projected the recording of the jail visit. The room fell into absolute silence as everyone listened to Robert's voice. "You are 71 years old. What do you need $2 million for? You're going to die soon anyway. I just sped up the inevitable." When the recording ended, the silence was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I saw several jury members look at Robert with a mixture of horror and repulsion. The prosecutor rested his case after 8 days of demolishing testimony. Now it was the defense's turn to present its case. We expected Robert to testify, to try to explain himself, justify himself, lie. But his lawyer, wisely, decided not to put him on the stand. He knew that anything Robert said would only worsen his situation. Instead, the defense called a psychologist who tried to argue that Robert suffered from extreme financial stress that had affected his judgment. that he was not in his right mind when he planned the poisoning. The prosecutor tore him apart on cross-examination. "Doctor," David asked, "does financial stress cause someone to spend months meticulously planning a murder? Does it cause someone to investigate specific poisons, contact suppliers, falsify documents, take out fraudulent insurance policies? Is that lack of judgment or calculated premeditation?" The psychologist stammered. "Well, in extreme cases." "Answer the question, doctor. Was this lack of judgment or premeditation?" "Premeditation," he finally admitted. The defense had nothing else. After only 2 days, they rested their case. It was time for closing arguments. Prosecutor David stood in front of the jury and spoke for almost an hour, reviewing every piece of evidence, every testimony, building a case so airtight that it was impossible to find reasonable doubt. "Ladies and gentlemen," he concluded, his voice echoing in the silence of the room, "Robert is not a victim of circumstances. He is a predator who saw his own mother as a source of money, who planned her death coldly, calculatedly, without remorse. He only regrets being caught. And if you do not stop him here, if you do not send the message that this type of evil will not be tolerated, then we are saying that it is okay to kill your mother for money, that it is okay to accidentally poison your wife while trying to murder your parent, that the value of a human life is simply the money you can extract from it." Defense attorney Arthur did his best, but it was like trying to empty the ocean with a spoon. He argued reasonable doubt, but without offering any credible alternative explanation for the mountain of evidence. The judge gave instructions to the jury, and they retired to deliberate. George told me it could take days, maybe a week, depending on how thorough they were. It took 3 hours. 3 hours to decide my son's fate. When the bailiff announced that the jury had reached a verdict, my heart started beating so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Samantha took my hand and squeezed it tightly. We re-entered the courtroom. The jury took their seats. Judge Michael asked, "Have you reached a verdict?" The foreman, a middle-aged man with a serious expression, stood up. "Yes, Your Honor. How do you find the defendant on the charge of attempted murder in the first degree against Evelyn Smith?" "Guilty." The word fell like a hammer. Robert closed his eyes. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder. "How do you find the defendant on the charge of attempted murder in the first degree against Samantha Torres?" "Guilty." "How do you find the defendant on multiple charges of fraud, forgery, and embezzlement?" "Guilty on all counts." One by one, 17 charges in total, and the verdict was the same every time. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Samantha began to cry silently next to me. I remained motionless, without tears, only feeling a strange emptiness where the pain had been before. Justice. Finally, justice. The judge set the sentencing date for 3 weeks later. Robert was escorted out of the courtroom, and for the first time I saw him truly broken. He was no longer the arrogant man who had looked at me with contempt in jail. He was a convicted criminal who finally understood the consequences of his actions. Outside the courthouse, a crowd of reporters was waiting for us. Microphones extended toward us like weapons. "Mrs. Evelyn, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you have anything to say to your son? Does this bring closure?" I stopped in front of the cameras. George had said I didn't have to talk, but I wanted to. I needed to. "Justice was done today," I said, my voice clear and firm. "Not just for me, but for all victims of family abuse. For all the elderly who are seen as disposable by their own children. For all the people who suffer in silence because society tells them they must forgive family no matter what. Family love is not unconditional when that love is used as a weapon. And today, a brave jury said enough. Will you forgive your son? A reporter shouted. Forgiveness, I replied, is something that is earned. Robert has many years ahead of him to reflect on what he did. If he ever shows genuine repentance, if he ever understands the magnitude of his betrayal, maybe then we can talk about forgiveness. But that day is not today. The 3 weeks until sentencing passed in a whirlwind. The story continued to grow. Now there were documentaries in production, books being written, podcasts dedicated to the case. I became an involuntary public figure. But I also started something new. With the advance money from a book I had agreed to write, I established a foundation. I called it Voices of Wisdom, dedicated to protecting older adults from financial and physical abuse by their family members. I hired pro bono lawyers, social workers, counselors. We created a hotline to report abuse. In the first 2 weeks, we received over 500 calls. Samantha joined as co-founder. Together, 2 women who had been enemies, we built something beautiful from our shared tragedy. Finally, the day of the sentencing arrived. The courtroom was even more crowded than during the trial. Judge Michael entered and we all stood up. Robert was brought in, looking thinner, older, defeated. The judge reviewed the documents in front of him. Mr. Robert, he began, his grave voice resonating in the room. I have carefully reviewed this case. I have read every testimony. I have examined every piece of evidence. And I must say that in my 32 years as a judge, I have rarely seen a case of family betrayal so calculated, so cold, so completely devoid of humanity. You did not act on impulse, the judge continued, looking directly at Robert. You did not act in a moment of weakness. For months, deliberately, systematically, you planned to murder the woman who gave you life. The woman who worked double shifts for years to give you education, opportunities, unconditional love. And you did it for money, for pure greed. The judge paused, letting his words sink in. Furthermore, your collateral actions are equally repulsive. You stole from your own children's college account, leaving them without an educational future. You defrauded your wife, falsified her signature, put your family home at risk. You manipulated and deceived multiple women. And when your plan failed, and you almost killed your wife instead of your mother, you showed no remorse, only rage at being discovered. Robert kept his head down, his shoulders trembling slightly. The law allows me some discretion in sentencing, Judge Michael said. But in this case, I find no mitigating circumstances, no reason to show mercy. You represent the type of evil that society must repudiate with the greatest possible force. The judge raised his gavel. For the charges of attempted murder in the first degree against Evelyn Smith, I sentence you to 25 years in prison. For the attempted murder in the first degree against Samantha Torres, another 25 years. These are to be served consecutively, not concurrently. In total, 50 years in state prison. A murmur ran through the room. 50 years. Robert was 45. He would be 95 when he got out, if he lived that long. Additionally, the judge continued, for the multiple charges of fraud, forgery, and embezzlement, I add another 10 years, also consecutive. Total sentence, 60 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for a minimum of 40 years. The gavel fell with a bang that resonated like thunder. Robert slumped in his chair. His lawyer tried to hold him up. I heard a choked sob escape his throat. But I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not sadness, not relief. Just emptiness. The bailiffs lifted him to take him away. At the last moment, Robert turned his head and looked at me. His eyes were red, filled with tears. He moved his lips silently. I'm sorry. I simply looked at him, expressionless, and looked away. Outside the courthouse, the crowd was even larger than after the verdict. Cameras, microphones, people shouting questions. But this time, Samantha spoke first. "Today, my son and daughter recovered some justice," she said firmly. "Their father betrayed them in the most horrible way possible. He stole their education, their security, their innocence. But he will not steal their future. Evelyn and I will make sure of that." Then it was my turn. 60 years, I said simply. It is a severe sentence. Some will say too severe. But when you try to kill your own mother for money, when you put deadly poison in cookies and send them as a gift, when you show not 1 ounce of genuine remorse, then you deserve every day of those 60 years. My son is alive. I am alive. Samantha is alive. And that is more mercy than he showed us. The following months were a time of slow but constant healing. The Voices of Wisdom Foundation grew exponentially. We opened offices in 3 cities. We helped more than 2,000 elderly people in the first year. We achieved legislative changes that made it more difficult for abusive relatives to exploit their older relatives. Samantha sold the family home, too many bitter memories, and bought a beautiful apartment near mine. Andrew and Diana began intensive therapy. It was difficult, especially for Andrew, who struggled with anger and shame. But slowly, with love, patience, and professional support, they began to heal. I also went to therapy. A kind therapist named Mark, yet another Mark in my life, helped me process the trauma of the betrayal. "The pain never completely disappears," he told me in one session. "But you will learn to live with it, to turn it into something that strengthens you instead of destroying you." And he was right. The pain transformed. It became purpose. I wrote my book. It was titled The Price of Blood, A Mother Betrayed. It was published a year after the sentencing and became an instant bestseller. The proceeds went directly to the foundation. I started giving talks at universities, community centers, and aging conferences. I told my story without shame, without hiding anything. And after each talk, elderly people would approach me crying, telling me their own stories of abuse, thanking me for giving them a voice. Samantha became an activist too. She testified before Congress about the need for better protections for victims of economic domestic violence. Her story, surviving a poisoning that was meant for someone else, captured the public imagination in a unique way. And slowly, incredibly, Samantha and I became real friends. Not just allies in revenge, but genuine friends. We had dinner together twice a week. We went to the movies, we laughed, we cried. We supported each other through the difficult days. "You know what's ironic?" she told me one night while we were drinking wine in my living room. "Robert spent years trying to drive us apart, to keep us as enemies, and in the end, his wickedness was exactly what brought us together." We toasted to that bitter irony. The years passed. 3, 4, 5 years. Andrew graduated from high school with honors. Diana flourished, joining her school's debate team. Both decided to legally change their last name, taking Samantha's maiden name instead of Robert's. It was their way of closing that chapter. Robert wrote letters from prison. At first, letters of excuses, of justifications. Then, letters of rage, blaming Samantha and me for ruining his life. I read them and kept them in a box without ever responding. But after the 5th year, the letters changed. They became different, more reflective, more honest. "Mum," he wrote in one, "I have had 5 years to think, to face what I did. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But you need to know that I finally understand. I understand the magnitude of my betrayal. I understand that I tried to take away the one thing no one has the right to take, your life. And I did it for money. For darn money that wouldn't even have solved my problems. It would only have postponed them. I was a monster. And if I could go back in time, if I could undo every decision I made, I would. But I can't. So all I can do is tell you that I'm sorry and live the rest of my life, all these years in prison, with the weight of what I did to you. I read that letter 3 times, and for the first time in 5 years, I cried. Not for Robert, but for everything we had lost, for the family we could have been, for the son I thought I had versus the man he really was. But even with that letter, I didn't answer. Forgiveness, if it would ever come, needed more than pretty words written from a prison cell. It needed time. It needed actions impossible to perform from behind bars. Maybe it would never come. And I had made peace with that possibility. 10 years after the sentencing, I received an unexpected call. It was from the warden of the prison where Robert was serving his sentence. "Mrs. Evelyn," he said in a serious voice, "your son is in the prison hospital. He had a severe heart attack. The doctors say he has days, maybe hours. He is asking to see you." My first instinct was to hang up, to let him die alone as he had planned for me to die. But something in me, perhaps the last spark of the woman I had been before all this, made me hesitate. I called Samantha. "You don't have to go," she told me immediately. "No one would judge you if you didn't go. He doesn't deserve your presence." "I know," I replied. "But I need to go, not for him, for me, to truly close this chapter." I drove to the prison the next day. I was escorted through cold, grey corridors until I reached the infirmary, and there, in a narrow bed, connected to machines that beeped monotonously, was Robert. He had aged 20 years in 10. His hair, now completely grey, was thin. His face was haggard, with deep lines of suffering etched into every wrinkle. When he saw me enter, his eyes filled with tears. "Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You came." I sat in the chair next to his bed, keeping my distance. "The warden said you are dying." "Yes." He coughed weakly. "Irreversible heart damage. The doctors say it's a matter of days." We were silent for a long moment. The beeping of the machines filled the space between us. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he finally said. "I know I don't have that right, but I needed to see you one last time. I needed you to know that these 10 years changed me. Prison took everything from me, my freedom, my pride, my identity, but it gave me something too, clarity, time to face the monster I had become." "And?" I asked coldly. "What did you discover?" "That I was a coward," he replied, tears rolling down his sunken cheeks. "A selfish coward who valued money more than human life, who valued my comfort more than my mother's love. I tried to kill you. Mum, I put poison in cookies that I sent you as a gift, and I almost killed Samantha in the process. I destroyed my own children, all for greed." His voice completely broke. "I have had 10 years to relive that moment every night, to imagine how you would have died, to imagine your last moments of agony. And every night I wake up screaming, because I understand that was my plan. I was going to cause you that agony, your own son." I looked at him, this broken man who was once my baby, and I felt nothing. Neither rage, nor sadness, nor even satisfaction for his suffering. Just a weary emptiness. "Robert," I said slowly, "I appreciate your words. And maybe they are genuine. Maybe you really have changed. But forgiveness is not something I can give you right now. Maybe never, because the harm you caused wasn't just to me. It was to Samantha, who almost died and will now live with permanent kidney damage. It was to Andrew and Diana, who lost their father and had to carry the shame of your crime. It was to those 3 women you manipulated and used. I know, he sobbed. I know. But, I continued, and my voice softened slightly, I will tell you this. I hope you find peace before the end. I hope these last few days are not filled with terror, but with acceptance. And I hope that in your next life, if there is such a thing, you will be better than you were in this one. I stood up to leave. Mum, he called weakly. Andrew and Diana, are they okay? A small smile touched my lips. They are more than okay. Andrew is in college studying law. He wants to be a prosecutor, specializing in victim protection. Diana is in high school, captain of the debate team. They are both brilliant, kind, strong. Samantha and I made sure of that. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for giving them what I couldn't. Goodbye, Robert, I said, and walked toward the door. Mum, he called one last time. I love you. I always loved you, even when my greed blinded me. Please believe me that at least. I stopped at the door without turning around. Maybe you did love me, I said softly, but not enough. And that is the tragedy of all this. I walked out and didn't look back. Robert died 3 days later. I did not attend the funeral. Only 3 people did. His defense attorney, a prison chaplain, and surprisingly Martha, the woman who had been pregnant with his child. She called me afterward. I didn't go for him, she explained. I went because my son, who is now 10 years old, deserves to know that his biological father received a dignified burial, even if he was a monster. But I want you to know, Mrs. Evelyn, that my son carries my last name, not Robert's, and he will never know the complete truth about his father until he is old enough to process it. You are a good mother, I told her sincerely. More years passed. The Voices of Wisdom Foundation expanded internationally. We helped more than 50,000 elderly people in 15 countries. Samantha and I were recognized with humanitarian awards. I wrote 2 more books. I became a respected voice on issues of aging and family protection. Andrew graduated from college and indeed became a prosecutor. His first case was against a man who had defrauded his elderly father of his life savings. He won, and when he called me crying with joy, I knew that something beautiful had been born from our tragedy. Diana was accepted into a prestigious university with a full scholarship. She decided to study psychology, specializing in family trauma. I want to help children like me, she told me. Children who have to process their parents' betrayal. And I, at 83 years old, finally found peace. Not a peace that erased the pain, but one that integrated it. One that transformed it into purpose, into strength, into a legacy. One afternoon, sitting in my garden with Samantha, now my best friend, drinking tea and watching my grandchildren play with their own children, I realized something fundamental. Robert wanted to kill me to take my life, my house, my money. But he failed. And in his failure, he inadvertently gave me something more valuable, a renewed purpose. A second family in Samantha. The opportunity to save thousands of elderly people from similar fates. A platform to change laws and protect the vulnerable. What are you thinking about? Samantha asked, noticing my reflective expression. That I survived, I replied simply. Not just the poison, but the betrayal, the pain, the loss. And on the other side of all that, I built something beautiful. Samantha took my hand and squeezed it. We built it together, she corrected. I smiled. Yes, together. The sun was setting over the garden, painting everything gold and rose. My great-grandchildren were laughing, chasing butterflies. Samantha and I rocked gently in our chairs, two women who had been through hell and emerged stronger. And in that moment of perfect peace, I understood the final lesson. Revenge is not in destroying the one who hurt you. True revenge is living so well, so fully, so meaningfully, that their attempt to destroy you becomes the catalyst for your greatest triumph. Robert wanted to end my life. Instead, he gave it meaning. And that, finally, was my victory.